Laura, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Laura Hope, and I'm a content creator and full-time video editor, social media manager. I am a big lover of anime and I love to film at conventions. I spend my free time making videos about anime movies and anime series.
First question I have to ask, and I'm sure you've been asked this many times, and it's such a painful question. What is your favorite anime?
Gotta say, my favorite anime is a little bit of a controversial choice, but I absolutely love the 12 Kingdoms, the anime that kind of was the segue into my real passion. I think because it aligns so strongly with fantasy and lore novels that really pulled me in. It's such a vast world, and there's so many characters with kind of their own set of armor, coat of arms, moral compass that they're driven by. It was portraying a visual opposite to Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and Throne of Glass, all of these amazing fantasy series that I've been so drawn to. So it was the perfect segue for me into anime because it took my existing passion for like medieval stories and lore and transferred me right into the world of anime. So I would say that's my favorite, yeah.
You know, it's funny because I would have a similar answer, not with 12 Kings. I actually haven't seen that yet, but I remember when Yu-Gi-Oh! First got broadcasted in North America and I watched that. That was my first sort of exposure to anime itself. And I've always been a fantasy fan as well. And I remember finding clips online for Attack on Titan and just watching this, I'm like, ooh, oh, wow, this is sick. And I started watching more and more and more. I'm like, okay, now I gotta watch it. So now I watch Attack on Titan, and that became my gateway into anime.
I so resonate with that. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just such a nostalgic piece of anime. I remember in the buy-sell trade store that my family owned when I was growing up, when the Yu-Gi-Oh! Movies came in like a stock bin and VHS. And it was just a core memory for me, kind of popping that in the machine and watching them. And yeah, I was really more driven to the movies, which are now kind of a rarity to collect, by the way.
Yeah?
Yeah, if you see the Yu-Gi-Oh! VHS movies, I think they go for like some good point because they're a little bit more rare, the releases.
Wow. I mean, all the movies I've seen online, I've never seen a VHS copy ever.
No way.
Wow, I
That's
gotta
so
look at this.
funny. You must.
So, as we know, it's really cool to kind of binge through a ton of anime, especially when they're 12 episodes nowadays. It's really interesting to see like how much story can get done in in those 12 episodes or 24, whichever it might be. What has been the most fulfilling arc or best character development you have seen in anime?
I think it seems like such a daunting question because it's so broad, but what
Yeah,
first comes to mind is Evangelion. Just
right.
because Shinji evolves several times throughout the series, more specifically as he pilots his Evangelion. You know, I'm still kind of decompressing everything after seeing Thrice Upon a Time in theaters and having everything come to a wrap. But the way that Shinji evolves and is always kind of exploring the human psyche, it takes, you know, the really kind of gruesome and frankly complicated arc of Evangelion and reduces it into a really relatable moment because of all of its human qualities. Deserves to be kind of put on this pedestal as one of the greatest, I'm sure so many would say, but it's also because the exploration that Shinji goes through so many times, it's very relatable, and I would say probably, yeah, one of the most iconic series of all time.
Yeah, definitely one of those classics. I'm so jealous because I've been meaning to watch Evangelion, but I always have a hard time finding it.
But even speaking of the movies, Hikaru Utada, who's like a great Japanese icon in music, she did an incredible song for Thrice Upon a Time. Oh, can you give me one last kiss? Has done some pretty iconic music work for like Kingdom Hearts and some other cool anime series. So it's nice that she, you know, kind of reprised her presence as she's done some other Evangelion songs as well. But so that's a good note for the movie if you get to watch it.
What has been the most unique concept you have seen?
What comes to mind is Shitoshi Kon's Millennium actress. As a fellow film student, I know you'll really, really appreciate this one. It basically takes time and fantasy and kind of warps both of those concepts to explore the story of a woman through her roles as an actress over the course of a millennia. Shocked to see them breaking the fourth wall and approaching all of these different concepts of time and leaving the viewer very mystified by all the possibilities of what could be the explanation for all of these oddities.
Well, I mean, an easy answer for me to go to even with this, and I've talked about it on my channel too, but there's this one called World's End Harem.
I've heard of this anime, but I haven't watched it.
All the men in the world, with the exception of about 4 or 5, all died. So it's a world run by women. And then there's like 4 or 5 guys. I've really gravitated towards the stories that they take like a normal, well, quote unquote, normal situation and then flip it on its head, where you can't just apply the same rules and logic to it. You have to figure out a new way to deal with that. So I'm watching this and you have to imagine like, okay, so you have this world, 3 billion women, 4 or 5 guys. What's the economy like? What's the politics going to be like? How does the life around these 4 or 5 guys evolve? Because one of the things that the show explores a lot is, you know, the main issue that comes up is how are we going to continue reproducing? So it makes
I love something like that that grabs your interest right away just because of its uniqueness. An opposite of kind of Handmaid's Tale, an opposite of Children of Men, that type of series, this dystopian birth rate impacting storyline. But I've never really, can't think of anything that I've seen it switched. I've seen it where it's been very reduced, the amount of women that are available like for reproduction, but I haven't seen it be actually the flip.
On that topic, so as I said, like I remember watching that first episode of World's End Harem and I'm like, oh, this is cool, I really want to get into it. And then personally, the more I watch it, it just became so bleh. It's like, oh, this is not what I was expecting. There was another recent one that kind of did that for me, where I was watching Cheat Skill from Another World that I used in the real world, which is about a guy who grew up super bullied. His family ostracized him. He was in his 30s, very self-conscious, gained a lot of weight, and his grandfather gave him some sort of magical doorway to get him to a fantasy world. And through that fantasy world, he has this literal physical transformation. He turns into like a hot guy, super muscular, super strong, super fast, gets a little bit of magic with him, and then he goes back into the real world and like all the girls are crushing over him and he's able to have more confidence to deal with his family, blah blah blah. Again,
for him.
First episode, phenomenal, absolutely loved it. And then after a while it started to become more and more boring. It did not pan out what I was expecting. For you, what show did you find had potential to be great but then fell flat?
First thing that comes to mind is probably the Netflix anime 7 Deadly Sins. I'm not sure if you've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
But I had some high hopes for it, and I watched the first couple episodes, and I think it was within the first or second episode that I kind of decided that it wasn't going to really be for me, which some animes that happens, and you revisit, and you regret your decision. But when I did that, I revisited the Deadly Sins. I was like, yeah, I think this same kind of scene or this ethos that was being displayed is the same reason why I'm going to switch to something else now. And it was at the beginning, you know, I really, really love an array of characters or a band of characters that are like different species and have different traits and all of that. So that's what really I found alluring about the series. And also I'm such a sucker for I guess, traditional lore. So anything that is related to that and this kind of general depiction of the 7 Deadly Sins, I was like, oh, I think that's something I'd really align with. But it was in one of the initial scenes where I believe it's the female protagonist and she's kind of discovered and she's waking up and the male protagonist is like just straight up raping her while she's asleep and which, I mean, welcome to anime, you know, but at the same time, when she awoke, she was so completely okay with what had happened and her curiosity was so piqued that I felt like this was just such a female that was written by men. And which, you know, sometimes men are very successful in writing female characters and that respect shines through. But for this particular scene in this character introduction, I felt like it was just lacking a little bit of the forward-thinking, you know, female empowerment character that I was looking for. So I would say that was something that kind of made me sad trombone in terms of my participation in watching it.
You brought up a very important part, and I love how you mentioned that. Yes, I mean, it's typical in anime. There's a lot of, well, sexualization that goes on, primarily on the women, sometimes with men, but it is primarily on the women. That's just the industry. But I've also talked about this on my channel too. Number one, this isn't anything new. It's been going on for a while, unfortunately. Number two, this is also not just Japan. It happens all around the world. There's plenty of examples in America. Look at Black Widow, look at Wonder Woman. There's stuff happening with those guys. Number three, I've always had a very distinct, very firm opinion that, look, it's okay to sexualize everyone, or it's not okay to sexualize, period. And I'm on the side of, let's just not sexualize anyone, period, end of story.
Yeah, I think it's different maybe if characters are sexualizing themselves. I guess that shows a different type of approach to it. I see what you mean in terms of it not being live action and them not being able to make that choice.
Well, specifically, I'm coming from, like, I've seen examples, especially in the West, where men have been sexualized, and you can't say that's okay. Black Widow being in a very skin-tight black outfit is not okay. You can't have it both ways. So
that's
it's either
very true.
So it's either it's all okay or none of it's okay. And I'm very happy to be on the side of none of it should be okay. Let's just not sexualize anyone. And there's been plenty of good stories in the Western field, in the Eastern field, everywhere across the board, of good stories being told without having to sexualize anyone.
It's very true, and it makes us wonder why that's so needed. Like, even when we think about the Hobbit series, it was so interesting how they had to interject like a new love interest and a new character. Even though I love Evangeline Lilly, I'm a big Lost fan, her portrayal was wonderful. As a diehard Lord of the Rings fan, that also made me really question exactly what you're touching on there, is why is there this innate need for that to carry a story? Because I think it's really not crucial.
Yeah, oh boy, we could talk about The Hobbit all day. I'd be more than happy to go there. I'm going to try and stick to us to the anime. What has been the best example of a hero or protagonist? And I'm also going to combine that. What's been the best example of a good villain or antagonist?
The Alucard from the Castlevania anime. I found his character to be really enlightening, especially after playing so many Castlevania games growing up. They don't really have a full personality sphere. It's interesting. I found his kind of quippy nature to be very paradoxical, given that he's, a ruthless killer and comes from a vampiric family. So there's all the stereotypes that come with that. So to have the character be so refined and so forward thinking and so next gen in terms of kind of fighting the toxic cycle of his family, and goes against that traditional sense that's being shown to you so hard. So it's very interesting. I found the character surprised me. And I think in anime, there can be such predictability in the protagonist and such predictability in some arcs, unfortunately, just because everything is kind of a copy of something else in terms of storyline at this point. So I found being surprised by a character like Alucard very, very refreshing. And so when I kind of scan all of the animes that have really taken a place in my heart that I love, he stands out to me so much, and I think he's kind of an underrated character.
It's interesting, like, when I think about the topic of hero, villain, protagonist, antagonist, really your protagonist is usually only as good as the antagonist or the villain.
It's funny that you say that, because what I was thinking for like my villain is Lord Cobb. He's from Tales of Earthsea. So Lord Cobb is one of the creepiest villains I've ever seen in anime. He really has this bone-chilling quality, like in a physicality, and his words, given that he's kind of driven and made decrepit by his allure for controlling death. So it's interesting, not unlike some other characters like Voldemort or Gollum that kind of become more decrepit as they use their, unhealthy, toxic powers. Right. But the interesting thing was also too that really made it stand apart. I guess I didn't know why this villain impacted me so much, but then I realized later that he was, in the American release, he was voiced by Willem Dafoe. The performance is so great, like the voice acting is so great, and Willem Dafoe has such an innate, fear-inducing quality to his voice, like think of some of his other roles.
What's that? A scar on his face. Sparrowhawk. The Archmage pays me a visit. Find him for me here, or or else.
Yeah, for me, for some reason, that sticks out.
If you listen to anyone from the West who explains hero villain, usually it's the ones that kind of are good for going against each other because they challenge each other and then they both grow, and that's what's become interesting. A good example of this is the Dark Knight trilogy, Batman versus the Joker. It competing morals, competing strategies, and they push each other to get better and better and better. When it comes to anime, another great example I can think of is going back to the original Yu-Gi-Oh series. And that is an interesting example because the Yu-Gi-Oh series are very formulaic in terms of there's always the main hero, the main hero's best friend, best girlfriend, whatever you want to call it. And then there's a rival, and then there's villains. And those two are very interesting examples of a protagonist and an antagonist because they're constantly fighting each other and constantly improving each other, both in how they fight, but also as people. They're getting better and better and better and better and better.
Interesting to watch those exchanges of power as it evolves as well.
Yes.
There's a shifting sense of belief as they both evolve and kind of bounce off of each other in that way. You're always shifting in your belief of who holds that power.
Your main hero doesn't have to be the most powerful person in the cast. Like, there's all these ones where the main hero is basically the most powerful person in the cast.
I would say it's most common that it is that they are the most powerful, or they have the unique quality that is the piece of the puzzle to solve the general issue. But it is very interesting when a protagonist has a lot of like anti-hero qualities. I feel like that it makes them so much more relatable and likable, and those are the characters that give like complex emotions, because in reality, none of us are good at everything that we do. None of us are even the best things that we're good at. We're not consistently good at them. You know, sometimes there's days where our skill level falters. And so sometimes I find a lack of ability to relate with characters that are just so obscenely OP and they cannot be, trifled with.
One thing that of course, like, story is really, really important, but one thing I think doesn't get talked about enough, which is so important when it comes to telling the story, telling the emotions, and capturing you into this world, is music. What has been the most unique music score you have heard? And I'm also going to combine that with what's been the best example of music emphasizing the story.
I would probably say is Ghost in the Shell, because at the time that it was released, I think that there was nothing really comparable to that. And it takes, kind of traditional Japanese music and is mixing it with this cinematic styles that I hadn't seen as much, because a lot of the earlier animes, they had a different style of music that was more based around like popular Japanese music at the time, where I found this to be highly cinematic for other animes that I was seeing released at the time. Very unique samples, very unique sounds, a lot of choir work, a lot of harmonization was being used, even at sometimes vocal work with no instrumental music at the back, which provokes a lot of emotion and builds a lot of tension for the scene. And then in terms of music being so derivative to the scene building, the forest of piano, or some people say forest of piano, the piano of the forest. I've seen it kind of titled a jumble of those words. Great anime, love it so much. It's very emotional, but basically it's around very highly academic children that are put in recitals for music and specifically piano in Japanese culture, which we know, like, a lot of young Japanese musicians are so highly skilled and the competition is so intense. And it really depicts that with the very emotional and very transitional monologues that are given by the characters while they're doing their recital. So they're paired with very beautiful piano pieces while the characters are having these really profound visions, very profound self-exploration, very beautiful realizations about their relationships with other characters, while these music pieces are kind of coming to their peak. So at first, when I was watching the series, I actually began to see that was a pattern within the episodes, that when the emotion was hitting, when the resolution was coming, it was always paired with like a beautiful recital. And at first I kind of found that a little bit predictable, but it became to be one of the things that I expected and loved so much and found so comforting about the anime. Was it almost kind of sounded like the self-help literature and self-reflection that everybody could apply to that were paired to this music. So that's something that without the music, I don't think that those monologues would have landed, because they're in some ways like a little bit dramatic, but the music supporting it with the same amount of drama really like made everything soar.
And I gotta talk about Magica Magica.
Okay.
So I think the full title is called Sis Puella Magica Magica, which is technically Latin for the magical girl Magica. Oh my gosh, a great anime. If you're into fantasy, especially dark fantasy, oh my gosh, you'll love it. I've seen it like 3 times back to back. For those that are familiar with the magical girl genre, which is basically a popular kind of subgenre of fantasy where you have the teen or preteen girls that gain magical powers, often a cute outfit, a cute transition, if that makes sense. And they just become these little, well, magical girls. They have magical powers, they go on adventures, they do cool stuff. A popular example might be Sailor Moon.
Like Cardcaptor Sakura, kind of same.
Exactly. Magica Magica takes that concept and flips it on its head, where the idea is that if you turn into a magical girl, there's kind of like this cycle curse thing where you turn into a magical girl and you have to kill these foes that are known as witches, because these witches bring despair. The only problem is you have to constantly kill these witches so that you yourself don't fall into despair, because if you're a magical girl and you fall into despair, you then turn into a witch, where then you just automatically torment everyone else, and you're basically waiting until another magical girl comes and kills you.
Wow.
So it's super, super, super dark. And as soon as you listen to it, I just get transported to a whole other world where I just feel just depressed.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't want to sign on for more depression, but at the same time, I do want to check out that anime because I love witch-based stories. You know, there's something about fighting against the clock or fighting against a force that is going to impact your protagonist that really gets, you know, your hair on edge and really gets you invested in the story. So I'll definitely be checking that one out. Thank you for suggesting it.
But yeah, so there's a Konosuba movie. It's something about the Legend of the Crimson Demons, which is the society that Megumin and Union came from. The music I'm talking about in question is actually near the end. I want to try and explain without spoiling anything, but essentially, You know how in the Konosuba show, when Megumin casts her explosion magic, there's that soundtrack. Megumin kind of has like her dark night of the soul kind of moment where she doesn't feel like she's good enough. She doesn't think her magic can help, but she's part of this elaborate plan that Kazuya came up with, where Kazuya is depending on her to do it in order to help save the day. And there's a moment where the music gets introduced and it takes that familiar theme. It drastically slows it down. It's this great, intense build-up. That main theme is just getting slowed and built up more and more and more, and it's Megumin coming to this realization. It's like, no, I am needed, I am important, I am part of this party. And finally, when she comes to that realization, it's just this grand theme that gets played. And when all the party members figure out how to work together, you get the Konosuba theme. It's just played in just full glory as they just absolutely kick butt. And just, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
I know, I'm feeling transported by your story of the story. That's amazing.
It's super, super, super funny as well. I can't recommend it enough. What anime has made you laugh the most?
I guess the anime that made me laugh the most was a combination of Mobile Suit Gundam Wing and Initial D. Not because either of them are like laugh worthy in terms of their entire production, because they're both like very profound animes, you know, within history, and they're so wonderful. But the thing that's so funny was the translations between like the subtitles that I was seeing and what I was actually hearing for, like for the subs were so outrageous and ridiculous. And both of these series include such blatant misogyny at this point it is just laughable, and the things that they're just so comfortable saying. I think it's absolutely hilarious. So I remember sitting on my couch watching both of these series, and me and my partner were literally howling, like to the point where we're like crying because of things that, you know, to this day we still quote, or not even just misogyny, but just the boldness of what they were saying that would so now not be appropriate or would not be PC. You know, just like many shows, live action or anime that we revisit. It's so funny, the boldness, and so funny the things that are just first nature assumptions in society that get revealed in these texts, especially too when you think about them originally, you know, being written in Japanese and then being translated over. Some of the things that were interjected into the story, there were such clear Japanese perceptions of Western culture, were so funny because it was just the most kind of stereotypical tone-deaf things that you could assume about American people or about Westernized people were being interjected, and it was kind of like, would Western people say that about themselves? I'm not sure. But just so funny in the sense that not only is it lighthearted and it's retro, which brings its own nostalgia and happiness to the viewing experience, it's completely funny, completely silly in the terms of the things that you're going to hear the characters say to each other that are so blatantly inappropriate.
Typically, like, I'm sure we've all seen how normally in anime they make a lot of, well, I call culture jokes. You hear that all the time. There's a few times where there's like a unique approach to the humor. A good example is recently there was Bocchi the Rock, where there's a girl, her name is Bocchi. She's super shy, super introverted. She wants to be in a band, and when she's having her internal monologues or her feelings, they get expressed in the most anime way possible, where, like, let's say, like, the idea of her being on stage in front of an audience when she's super shy literally makes her kind of shut down and just like circuits going off everywhere. There's another moment where she was so scared of something it made her vomit, but instead of actually showing the vomit, it actually cut to an actual clip of a waterfall.
Oh, I love
like when it's bursting the water out. So it's those kind of like subversion of expectations, I guess. We could also talk about Konosuba, which is very much a sitcom in the sense where it's like there's just all these characters acting and reacting to a scene. You have Kaguya-sama, Love is War, which is basically a bunch of people making a big deal out of what's basically nothing. You have two people who are so full of pride and don't want to confess their feelings to each other that in itself is hilarious, because they have such intense feelings for each other that it just builds and builds and builds, and they're trying to like think 10 steps ahead to get around the issue and whatever.
I so agree. I love specifically about anime that you don't really see in any genre is those personal dialogue moments or interpersonal thought moments, meltdowns, things like that, being portrayed in a different style anime than the original show is being shown. Like within that, I love when you see the sort of like micro character of the character having a meltdown. You know, they have the steam coming out of their ears, they have the stereotypical like anime tears coming, or, you know, we have a lot of this going on. All of those really quirky traits, it's really interesting because they give us another side of the character that we don't typically get to see, and it's very theatrical, it's very absurdism.
What made you cry?
A lot of animes make me cry, especially because they're so emotional, these monologues that they give. In This Corner of the World, Grave of the Fireflies is an older Studio Ghibli movie. Both of these stories really capitalize on war, and they really depict the losses that happen in war in terms of your family, but also in terms of society and eroding society and your expectations of your everyday diminishing to essentially nothing. It's a real eye-opener. You know, a lot of animes, they focus on powers, they focus on isekai, they focus on taking us away from the real world. But these two films bring us closer to the real world, and the sadness and the ugliness that are shown in these films are directly relatable. They're also good kind of examples of history, because Japan has, you know, a lot of legitimate history being impacted by war, obviously, Hiroshima, obviously. These films are great history lessons in terms of they're really showcasing what actually did happen and how Japanese people were affected and how their families were affected and still affected to this day. But like literally, you're gonna sob. You're gonna sob, your whole family's gonna weep when you watch this. So definitely don't watch these films with anyone that you don't want to be crying in front of.
Well, if we're going to talk about anime that makes people cry, we absolutely have to bring up Violet Evergarden.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Absolutely.
Listen, you think you're tough? Try and watch episode 10.
All of our hearts are breaking. Or have you seen I Want to Eat Your Pancreas?
I've heard of that.
I find the anime movies are the ones that are really going to get you breaking down. Like the anime movies, I think that they have the intention of leaving a real emotional mark on you, a real emotional bruise, where not that anime series don't, but maybe because they just have more time to complete the task with their character development and with the way that things unfold. Even, for example, like one of the newest movies that's come out that's really, really popular in anime is Suzume. And it's doing really, really well. I went to go see it. It was wonderful. But you could tell that they were building that like they're planting the seeds for you to have your emotional breakdown right from scene one. Do you find that you watch a lot of anime movies or more anime series?
Definitely more series.
That's fair. I think that's where we differ a little, but that's why this is a really interesting conversation. And I'm always kind of looking for more series that I should watch that have a good recommendation. But then you go on Reddit and everything is rated so wonderfully because it's all subjective to what people love. But since I know you have good taste, I'm definitely going to go with some of your suggestions.
Oh, thank you. And since we're talking about, good taste, there is one I do think is really, really good. It's a really good fine balance of it's funny. It does have a bit of a dark sort of undertone to it. Very, very subtle dark tone. When you watch the final episode, for me, it makes me cry a lot too. And that's Angel Beats.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen this.
So the idea with Angel Beats is, it follows a bunch of teen kids where the idea is that if they die in the real world, but they didn't fulfill their dreams, they're kind of stuck in this sort of middle way universe between Earth and heaven, or
like a
whatever
purgatory kind of thing.
Yeah, so they basically come to essentially a high school and they're stuck there because they had a dream in their previous life and they never got the fulfillment. You get introduced to all these different casts and all these different characters. I will spoil one aspect. It's not too much of a spoiler, but the idea is that once these characters do get fulfillment, once they have accomplished what they want, they vanish. And that's the thing. Like, that's the thing that's so heartbreaking. It's not like they dust away like a Thanos snap or anything. Like, you have one shot where like these characters are interacting and then you cut to a wide shot, they're gone. Just like that.
Wow.
And it's like, it takes you like a few seconds to be like, what just happened? Like, a character could be hugging another character and another moment they're like, oh, they're just gone.
Such an interesting concept. I guess that is so much how people feel when they've lost somebody, is that it was just like that. I don't know, I think it's kind of beautiful in a way because it allows people who have grief to shift into the mentality that maybe their loved one passed because their dream and their desire was fulfilled.
Exactly. You know what?
Yeah.
Like, that's a really good way. It's like they completed their arc, so to speak.
So that's beautiful. It's one of those like, bittersweet, touching things that are beautiful.
Your favorite romance?
Probably Kimi no Na wa. Yeah, Your Name. It's one of the most, prominent anime movies to be westernized. It had some pretty big box office records at its time of release. It's just such a beautiful story and also has such a beautiful score. It might be one of the most popularized OSTs in terms of being on our side, Western culture. It's such a beautiful story that is so intricately woven through teenage awkwardness and angst and confusion about our own bodies. All of that is layered into the story. And visually, just such a stunning film in terms of like the actual animation quality and the parts of Japan that are displayed. A lot of people who have taken the time on Reddit and different threads to kind of go through and emulate the scenes by showing the real life locations. And they're just so spot on and so gorgeous.
When it comes to romance, my big thing is I really want to see relationship development. So that's a bit of a different concept from character development that I know we've heard a million times. Relationship concept is much like in the real world where the relationship is its own thing. Like, we as people, we grow and whatever, but that relationship, that between how we treat each other, our relationship between each other, that improves and becomes like its own thing. And for me, the one show, and it's especially, this is one where like if I'm ever in the mood where I want to feel that sort of lovey-dovey kind of emotion, this is the one I like to be attracted to, and that's quintessential quintuplets. In their universe, they look exactly the same with the exception of like a few subtle differences, but when you watch the anime or you read the manga, their designs are very, very distinct, so it's very easy to find one or the other. But what makes this show very, very unique in my eyes is that those 5 sisters are very distinct in their characters. They're not all treated the same. You can very much look at one person and know just about everything about them and know that they're completely different from this one. There's one that's a little more athletic. You know that these girls are more into the fashion, or this one's more techie. This one is smart. This one is dumb. This one has more social awareness than this one. Like, they're all very distinctive. The idea is that these 5 girls, they flunked high school, and their father hires a tutor, which is another boy in their class called Futuro. Futuro is like the student in the entire school, like 100% on all his tests and quizzes. He gets hired to tutor these girls, but he's very stingy, very rigid. He doesn't have a lot of the social awareness, and in some of his first interactions, he's straight up just not going out of his way to be mean, but he doesn't know how to be smooth or kind, I guess, in a sense. Like, he straight up tells this one girl's like, you better watch where you're eating or you can gain weight. So like he's that kind of person, and now he has to tutor these girls. And it's not just as simple as like they all sit down and do it. None of them want to do their homework, and none of them really like him. So now he has to develop himself
them, I guess.
and wrangle them, but also learn how to be more understanding, how to understand their problems, their needs, their desires, and they basically have to figure out how to work together as a family, how to cooperate with him. Eventually, I mean, it's a harem, so all 5 of them end up having crushes and feelings on this guy. But what stood out to me the most was this really showed their development of it. Like, it really showed, like, it's not just, oh, I have feelings, I'm just going to lunge myself and everything's great, like you might see in other animes. It's like they're still trying to figure it out. What does this mean? What are these feelings that I have? How does this come forth? And more importantly, how do I have a relationship with this guy when I'm technically in competition with my sisters, and I want to have a good relationship with my sisters?
That shows a lot of relationship awareness, I guess, which is typically one-dimensional, or it's between the 2 characters. And you're right, you pointed at something that can be very stereotypical in anime, is that growing relationship isn't really present. It's very this instant distinction of, I like you, therefore I am 100% invested and like desiring a marriage, or the complete road ahead is only for that boy, or I guess that crush, which is very present in that Suzume movie that is new as well. That was one of the downfalls with it that I found, even though it was wonderful all around. But like, the one thing that I didn't understand when I left the theater was like, why was the character so motivated though to go with the guy so soon? Like, there wasn't this thing between them that was established. It was almost just as soon as she saw him, the audience was supposed to understand, without it really being displayed at all, that she had these intense, loyal feelings, but you didn't really know why. It wasn't like his traits were shown and then it was shown that she liked those traits for whatever reason. It was just, he's here and he's the guy in the movie, so therefore she is in love with him and this is what's motivating all of these crazy actions. But so that's really interesting, and I definitely want to check that one out. I like that you say that the personalities of the different sisters are so obviously different and that you can so easily set them apart, because when you said the concept, I was not anticipating that would be easy.
To give like an opposite example, I mean, like, there's lots of other harems, like say Data Life, for instance. Data Life, there's like 14 girls and the one guy, but my problem with Data Life is that a lot of them aren't distinct enough that I can kind of separate one from another. There's like a couple of them that I can point out, but a lot of them are just kind of, they feel like copy and paste. So it doesn't feel interesting. But again, in this one, you can tell there's a unique relationship with each one.
That's nice. When there's a lack of NPC energy. Right?
100%, yes.
Yeah, I so get that. That's interesting. I need to check that out.
What has been the most shocking anime betrayal?
But for me, the one that stands out the most in terms of betrayal is in the anime movie Perfect Blue. In Perfect Blue, without giving too much away, the protagonist is a former idol, Japanese idol, who moves into acting and basically has a fan page online, which this is something to be said about this movie. It basically revealed the entire premise of catfishing and the entire premise of internet stalking and the entire image of hacking people's webcams to view them way before really there was even a standardized Logitech webcam available for purchase. So it's really, really interesting that is such a present theme. But the betrayal in this film is so integral to the story because it knocks your entire understanding of all the relationships off of its pedestal and takes away any sort of safety that you feel, because the only character that really enforces the safety throughout the film kind of ends up being the person who betrays. Basically, the main character, the former idol turned actress, is like, should I just go ahead and spoil it? I'm not sure.
Well, I'll put a spoiler thing up.
Yeah, okay. So basically at the end, it's the main character and former idol's manager, who has been her biggest supporter and has been the voice of reason and the voice of comfort for some of the concerns that come up around her being heavily stalked by a mentally ill fan who has been also hacking her kind of website that is supposed to be a virtual entrance to her bedroom that is supposed to be, you know, kind of friendly and harmless in the terms of the way that you go to Britney Spears' bedroom, you know, like that type of thing. As a young teen who likes her music, the people who end up kind of coming after the main character, you find out were heavily groomed and heavily motivated to do so by her manager, and shares a similar sentiment, which is really, really you do not see coming. And this film is really profound as well for some of its visual angling in terms of the animation, and the key shots of the film have been heavily reused in a lot of live action cinema. So like it's been kind of set to be reportrayed in Black Swan and to be reportrayed in I believe it's called Dark Water, the one with Jennifer Connelly. But there's a lot of movies that have taken from, and actually Inception as well has taken some of the framing from these iconic scenes and reused them. But it was something not only for this film to be so technologically advanced for its times in terms of like internet usage and internet community. I don't think those internet communities had even fully formed, but it was such a cautionary tale for what the reality of the internet is today. Yeah, that's a really, really shocking betrayal. So I don't think that that's a traditional answer, but it is something that is less of a betrayal of, you know, killing your own father or staying true to your cause and letting go of your powers or those types of things. It's a real human relationship that really dives into the taboo. Yeah, it dives into the taboo of real human relationships and how those betrayals can be so systemic and manipulative. So it's definitely something to check out, but it's not your traditional betrayal. What would you say is your favorite betrayal?
You know, that's a bit of an interesting question because number one, the greatest anime betrayal, but it's not one I got the same impact as everyone else, and I'll explain what I mean, is it's when Reiner and Bertolt came out as Titans in season 2 of Attack on Titan.
I remember being like, because they kind of revealed it, and I remember being like, just shocked.
The reason I say I didn't get the same impact as everyone is because again, my introduction to Attack on Titan was I found a bunch of clips online. Those clips I found was of that scene. So I knew that was happening. And then I saw in the full context of everything. And then I just hear reviews of everyone be like, oh my gosh, this is intense. And I'm like, I didn't get to feel this.
Oh my gosh, you were robbed of that experience.
Well, I kind of robbed myself in a way.
Yeah.
But I know but I can at least see like how it was so well hidden and there was like very, very subtle foreshadowing. So when it did happen, it was like, it made sense why and how it happened, but it didn't feel like they just kind of went left field. to bring it out.
I thought it was such a crazy revelation as well, because I remember, I don't know about you, I feel like just as a fellow film student, we tend to be so highly aware of foreshadowing. And even if something's mentioned once, I'm like, why is that being mentioned? What are the potential reasons that this could be brought back around? And I did not see that coming. So it is really nice when you can be surprised as someone who's like highly analytical about story execution. You tend to pick up on those things. So then when you don't, it's such a breath of fresh air.
Now, a different kind of betrayal that did come to mind is, have you ever seen Death Note?
Yes.
Light Yagami kills the female detective. I can't remember her name, but he kills like some woman.
I remember, I think it's the first time in that show as well where there's like the deception revealed in terms of putting somebody in that position. I don't think that happens before that, or even necessarily again. Because
what's unique about that scene is that it's not necessarily a surprise to us. We already knew that Light was doing that. What I loved so much about that scene, why it sticks out in my mind, and what's so brilliant about the show overall is we're following Light Yagami. We know his evil intention and his evil plans and stuff like that. It's just us waiting for someone to capture him, or someone to figure out his plan and to just seal the deal. So I remember watching that scene and seeing him, because the whole point is he's trying to get her name so that he can write her name down in his death note, in his book, exactly. But it's like she's not giving her name right away, and so Light Yagami is having to use all sorts of mental tricks. Like this scene stretches out for a few minutes, just constantly trying to talk her into giving him her name. And finally, when it does happen, it's like, no, don't do it. and then I can't remember if she actually dies or not, but it's one of those like, oh, it hurts. She actually fell for it.
It'd be so interesting to see a spoof series of Death Note where it's simply the iconic journal is simply swapped out for like a resident sign-in book at the front of like any business, and just the chaos that would ensue from that. I think that would be so funny.
That would actually be really funny. There you go. And guys, if you really like this video, let's try and get this video at least 100 likes, and maybe we'll do another video with Ms. Lara. All right, so once again, her links to her YouTube channel and her social media will be down in the description below. Again, Laura, thank you so much for your time and being a part of this. I love our conversation together.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so wonderful. I hope to be back.
Awesome. All right, I'll see everyone next time. Bye for now.